Right, today I just thought I'd talk to you very quickly about the changes in the Premises Cost Directions. So, for those of you who don't know, the new Premises Cost Directions came out way back in May, actually, May 2024. They replaced the 2013 Premises Cost Directions. And there's a few changes that we've noticed over the last 7 or 8 months that we thought we might bring to your attention because it might just highlight some of the changes that are going to affect you moving forward. So, one of the biggest changes that we see almost on a daily basis now is the changes to the lease rent review process. So they have changed the process slightly, and it's a little bit ambiguous, as it always is with the Premises Cost Directions, and it's open to interpretation, and different ICBs are interpreting it differently. But if you're in a leasehold premises, when you have a rent review, whereas before you used to be able to the landlord would instigate a rent review, as long as you had protections in the lease, the landlord could negotiate directly with the district valuer. That's not allowed anymore. So what the ICBs are wanting, what the NHS are wanting, is for you as the tenant to have an initial discussion and initial negotiations with the landlord before the district valuer is instructed. So you actually have to evidence those discussions that you've had with the landlord. They may be emails, telephone conversations before you agree a figure. So the landlord now can't just propose a rent figure, you provisionally accept it, and then the district valuer will then argue with the landlord. You have to be involved as GP tenants. You're going to have to be involved in that process, and you may have to instruct surveying firms like ourselves to assist you through the process. So when you have your rent review done by the landlord, just very important to seek advice, firstly probably from the ICB, to see how they're interpreting the new directions, see if they're happy for you to just provisionally accept it, or if they're wanting you to evidence those negotiations and what evidence they're wanting you to provide. Is it just simply an email saying we're happy to accept or we're happy to provisionally accept, or do you have to have evidence, some sort of negotiation and some sort of way of bringing the landlord down from their initial proposal? So speak to the ICB first, see what they're expecting. Otherwise, speak to surveying firms like ourselves to review the rent review notice that you've got from the landlord, review your lease, and advise on the best next steps from that aspect. Another thing is with regards to the improvement grant funding, cap has now been removed. So when you apply for an improvement grant from the NHS, there used to be a cap on what percentage of that you could use as from the NHS, basically. So let's say you wanted to build an extension for £100,000. You wanted to get funding from the NHS, they'd only fund 66% of that. You'd have to find 34% yourself. So you'd have to fund it, you'd have to self-fund that. Now that cap has now been removed. So the NHS can now actually give you 100% funding. Now, just because they can do that, it does not mean they will do that. And I think it's still a major issue, ICB funding and ICB resources and finances all over the country. So like I said, although they have the ability to offer 100% grants, I'm not aware of many 100% grants that have been offered since May, since that cap was lifted, and more often than not, it's still going to be around the 66% category. So around that level, 66%. But look, if you're needing the grant money, you're needing some funding, approach the ICB and certainly see what they can offer. Now, on that side of things, in terms of approaching the ICB when it comes to improvements and upgrades, before you used to be potentially just send an email to the ICB and say, look, we're wanting to upgrade, wanting to extend. Is that okay? Do you approve it? And they could potentially just say yes or no. Sometimes what they'd ask you to do is fill in a project initiation document, which can be quite a lengthy document, almost a business case, effectively, trying to prove or evidence why you need that extra space, how it's going to be beneficial to the patients, to the staff, to the community, whatever it may be. And you'd have to provide that. So like I said, sometimes the ICB would ask for that project initiation document or a PID. It's actually a requirement now in the Premises Cost Directions that you have to submit a PID for all upgrades and improvements. So you can't just bypass that stage anymore. Unfortunately, you're going to have to go through the quite long and arduous process of completing a PID and then getting that PID, that project initiation document, approved and ratified by the ICB. So just an extra layer really of effort for yourselves to seek approval for an improvement and thing. But like I said, a lot of ICBs requested it anyway. So you may find that actually every single time you've asked for an upgrade and improvement, you've had to fill in one of those anyway. So this actually won't matter to you. But for those who have never had to do it and the ICB have perhaps been a little bit more lenient on that side of things, that's no longer the case. You're going to have to fill in a project initiation document. Another thing to be aware of is the 12-week deadline now to challenge or accept your notional rent reimbursement. So if you're in an owner-occupied premises, when you receive your notional rent assessment on a 3-yearly basis, you receive it from the district valuer. You've now got 12 weeks to either respond to accept it or decline it. Now, if you miss that 12-week window, technically the ICB will not pay you that increase in rent. So if they've proposed an increase in rent, they won't pay you that increase until you've responded either accepting or declining it. Before, some ICBs would just give you the district valuer's report and then automatically increase your rent reimbursement. That isn't the case anymore. You have to formally accept it or formally decline it. It obviously, if you're going to decline it, any increase is going to be held until that appeal has been resolved. So it's just to be aware of that. Now, I don't know how strict that 12-week period is. Some people are interpreting the 12-week deadline to suggest that you can't appeal against the notional rent outside of that 12-week window. Now, that certainly isn't the case, or at least that's not our interpretation of the premises cost directions. You can still appeal the notional rent assessment up to 3 years after you receive that letter, as long as you haven't already accepted it. So as long as you haven't responded accepting it, we can instigate appeals, 6, 7, 8 months after you receive that letter, 2 or 3 years potentially. So it's not as a big a deal as I think as some people are worried about. I think if we can keep within that 12-week period, it makes things a little bit easier and probably speeds the process up. But if we're outside of that 12-week period, it's not the end of the world. We certainly believe that we can still instigate an appeal, and we'll certainly have those discussions and negotiations with the ICB to kind of evidence that, and we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. Now, it might be a case that we don't know for sure until it's tested at NHS resolution level, which is kind of like the appeals board, if you like. So until these cases are actually tested, we won't know 100%, but certainly our interpretation is that you're absolutely fine appealing it outside of that 12-week window. And then the last point to make is leases are now required if all partners have retired and left the surgery. Now, to be honest with you, leases should be put in place if that's the case anyway. So it's although it's a formal requirement now from the ICB, it was certainly something that you should have been doing anyway. Really, even if there's just one partner that's retired and no longer a tenant, no longer operating and working at the surgery, I still certainly think you should be exploring the possibility of putting a lease in place then. Certainly getting some advice, certainly speaking to solicitors. Now, it might be a case that can be covered off in your partnership agreement and a formal lease won't need to be put in place, but you should be having those discussions. If you've got five owners of the premises and only 4 work at the surgery, you're really going to need to look at evidencing really who's going to be responsible for what. Because what if something happens? What if the roof caves in? Who's going to be paying for that? Who's going to be paying for the buildings insurance? Who's going to be responsible for that? Is it the 4 tenants or is it the five landlords? And if you don't have any documentation through a lease or at least a partnership agreement that stipulates that, it can cause issues and disputes further down the line, which can be ludicrously expensive to resolve. So I would say you should always be looking at putting a lease in place if there's unconnected parties anyway. Certainly, if all partners have retired, it is now a requirement within the premises cost directions that a lease is put in place. So look, they're the kind of main points that I wanted to talk about today. The premises cost directions is ludicrously long. I haven't even read it myself. But look, a lot of our surveyors have gone through it in a fine-tooth comb. We've got information on our website that goes into a little bit more detail about some of the changes and things to the premises cost directions. But there's probably quite a lot of information you can find on Google now about the changes in the premises cost directions if you want to learn a little bit more. And look, if you want any other information or want to have a conversation with us about anything we've talked about today or any premises related matters, get in touch either via email or on the phone.